I think Dawn was brilliant. I think that when you listen to Tony talk about the advice that she gave him, she knew the ins and outs of his case better than he did, as he stated last week in our live. She was really knowledgeable about the legal side of all of this. I mean, she was giving him advice and making sure that she was looking at the big picture and really understanding how Tony could win his case. And I did not realize that that was what was happening until Tony laid it out for us. So I think that, to me, she was very smart. She learned very quickly. Tony has said people thought she could be the governor. I mean, they thought she was on a track to really be a successful, strong woman, career woman, in whatever she chose. And so I think that is heartbreaking to me. I mean, because it's just that was taken away from her.
This is the Silver Linings Handbook podcast. I'm Jayson Blair. That's Dana Pohl, one of 3 journalists investigating the suspicious death of Dawn Pasela.
As we got to learn more about who Dawn was as a person, we knew she was incredibly kind and caring, and she was a fierce advocate for justice. And there were so many different, little things about her that I think we all saw in her that we were like, oh, if she was around today, we would all be her friend. And so it was a very natural decision to want to advocate for her. Because I think, if something like that happened to any of our friends, we would advocate for them without thinking about it. So taking on Dawn's case was kind of a no-brainer. But there's just so many small things about her, how she would volunteer at, dog shelters and would give people flowers and such. She was just such a sweet and kind person. And it's so upsetting to see what would ultimately happen to her.
That's Lexi Kakis, another member of the team creating the YouTube investigation seeking justice about Dawn's story.
Yeah, well, I mean, even just to continue on that, I think that's something that we've all felt really strongly about is you're absolutely right. The photos of Dawn when she's younger and even as she is an adult, her vibrancy is so clear. And I think what some of the harder photos of her later in life really show is that the stress that she was under and the turmoil that she was experiencing at her job and, and then internally was so real. And I think that's one of the things that is kind of hard for some people to grasp in this case is, how could you be so afraid of some threats and blah, blah, blah. Oh, it wasn't that bad. But it genuinely was, for Dawn.
That's Andrea Cipriano, the final member of the team. Dawn Pasela was born to Ed and Karen Pasela on June 28, 1985. Dawn was homeschooled and a part of a group that had a strict tradition, down to a dress code where she was expected to wear dark blue pants and a white blouse, even as a preteen. But Dawn's parents said a rebellious and high-spirited personality emerged in her childhood and developed as she grew into a young woman. Dawn's parents described her as a contrarian and once told the website Uncovered that if you told Dawn that the sky was blue, she would tell you it was pink. Dawn's mom, Karen, said she was always surrounded by friends, telling the website, quote, I don't think we ever had a weekend where we didn't have someone sleeping over. Dawn was a leader among her peers, often roping them into pushing buttons of their parents and other authority figures. Dawn's mom tells a story about how all her friends got together. They spent the afternoon on the phone calling Dillard's, Macy's, and Victoria's Secret stores in the area, looking for bras that were really bright to peek through their white shirts. Even though Dawn had an anti-authoritarian streak, she did well in school, graduating with honors from Cuyahoga Community College and then Cleveland State University, where she studied finance. Even though she died on April 25th, 2012, You can still find her LinkedIn page, where it lists her as a member of the Criminal Justice Club, Phi Theta Kappa, and the National Honor Society. She was also on the Dean's list at Cuyahoga. Soon after college, Dawn joined the Ohio Attorney General's office and was assigned to a multi-jurisdictional task force where she worked as an office manager and helped out on an investigation into a man accused of mortgage fraud, Tony Viola. Soon, Dawn noticed questionable behavior and eventually reached out to Viola's defense team with an offer to testify on his behalf. Just before she was scheduled to testify, Dawn was found dead in her apartment with a blood alcohol level of above 0.59. Her death was ruled an accident. Today, we're joined by Dana Pohl, who spent nearly 2 decades investigating and telling the stories of missing and unidentified, Lexi Kakis, who researched cold cases for Uncovered and is the co-host of the Broken System podcast, and Andrea Cipriano, a journalist who's investigated many of these same kinds of cases. So, guys, I'm going to give you a chance to go ahead and introduce yourselves. I'm really excited to have you on. Dana's been on the podcast before. We had a great episode, I think it was a few weeks ago. It came out on the feed where we explored Cobb County Jane Doe case, which was not far from where I grew up as a kid, and some of Dana's work, which I find really powerful and meaningful. And so it's great to have all of you guys on. So I'll go ahead I'll go ahead and throw it to you, Dana, to go give an introduction of yourself. You'll do a much better job than I will.
Well, thank you for having us here tonight. I'm excited to be here. And my name is Dana Pohl. I am a cold case researcher. I am a podcaster. I am a librarian. Have been, like you said, researching the missing and the unidentified for close to 20 years. I almost hate to say that, but it's true. And when I'm not doing research, I enjoy traveling. I enjoy visiting distilleries and breweries with my husband and my dog Rebel. And we also like to kayak. So that's a big thing. I can't wait till summer comes around and we get to jump in the boat and spend a day on the lake.
Nice. Which lake is it?
It's Lake Lanier, which...
Lanier? Yes, of course. Right.
People are like, you're crazy you got on that lake. 'Cause there's a lot of stories about it, but so far we're okay.
So who wants to go next? Lexi?
Sure. So I'm Lexi. I'm a New York based researcher. I was working for Uncovered for the last 2 years. And then most recently, I am the co-host of the Broken System podcast with Robert Palmer. And then really the last several months, this project has consumed so much energy and time, and it's been really cool to kind of watch it take form. But aside from true crime, I would say I'm really into watching a lot of television. Some not like some of it's kind of trash television, but I love it. Reading, music, that kind of thing. Being with like friends and family, big fan of dogs, that sort of thing. So
we love it. Trash TV is not a bad thing.
All day. No. All day long.
Like comfort.
Yes.
Very good at it.
So true. So, hi, everybody. I'm Andrea. I'm a New York City-based forensic psychologist, journalist, and a victim advocate. I graduated with a master's in forensic psychology from John Jay College of Criminal Justice, where I pretty much just focused on researching and peeling back the criminal mind. For 2 years, I've been a case researcher and the digital content specialist at Uncovered. And beyond the justice space, I am a new running enthusiast, emphasis on enthusiast. Nice. And I love listening to EDM music and going to concerts.
Oh, very cool. Very cool. So how did you guys, I'm just curious for all of you guys, I know a little bit about Dana's background in terms of like exploring cases like this. How did you end up on the path that you ended up on that got you here? Lexi, you want to take a swing at it?
I can take it first. Yeah. So I was listening to a lot of podcasts over the last 2 years, and I was like, oh, I want to do something to help. But I didn't know what that thing was, what that meant, or whatever. I was truly just like a consumer of it, but I thought it was really interesting. And then I found Uncovered, and I was a community member for a while. And then I became
And
on the team.
Uncovered is the group that explores like missing persons.
Yeah, so it's a database, and then there was also a community component. And just so from doing a lot of that work, the first case I researched was the Melissa Witt case, and that one is still near and dear to my heart because I kind of realized it happened in 1994. I was born in that same year, like literally like a month and 2 weeks when she went missing. So it was very bizarre from that perspective. And I just kind of fell down the rabbit hole. And then slowly but surely I met Dana and then Andrea, and it kind of just all meshed together really well.
And you and Robert on Broken Systems have a upcoming episode with LaDonna Humphrey, right?
We do. That's dropping on Monday.
Exciting for you?
Oh, yeah, super. I love chatting with LaDonna and Robert, so it's always a good time.
That's awesome. Well, I'm looking forward to it. I think it's out tomorrow, right? Tomorrow or Monday? Something like that.
Monday, yeah.
Oh, very cool. So, Andrea, how about you?
Yeah, so I grew up watching like all of the true crime TV shows. Like Criminal Minds was like just a drug to me, honestly. And, and then going from scripted crime TV to then watching unscripted, I was like, wait, oh my God, this stuff actually happens. And then so in high school, I pretty much knew like right away, okay, I definitely want to be in the criminal justice field. And so originally when I went to college at John Jay, I was just studying criminal justice. And my plan was to join the NYPD. I wanted to work in the cold case unit there. And so when I was a sophomore, I started at the NYPD orientation for cadets. And not even 24 hours after I started my orientation, I broke my foot. Ooh. So that, knocked me out. I couldn't walk for 8 to 12 weeks. So the NYPD said, you have to come back like the next time the cadet stuff rolls around. Right. And I mean, that felt so crushing to me because I was like, I want to do this now. I don't want to wait next summer. So I kind of took that time to reevaluate, why is it that I want to do this? Because it's not so much law enforcement. It was cold cases. So from there, I had like a little blog that I called The Crime Sheet. And I just kind of covered like documentaries and local cold cases in New York, because it was just like I wanted a place to kind of share what I was thinking and what was going on in the space. And from there, that's how I connected to Uncovered, where, I was using Uncovered to research cases. And then it was just kind of like a really natural synergy of just starting to work there. So, yeah.
So when you were in college and you were thinking about, like being on the NYPD cold case unit, did you ever trip across the book Restless Sleep?
It's here,
right there on your back shelf. Right. Yeah. It's a really great book.
Yes.
Case squad scene.
Yes.
And, it was so moving for me because there's this one case from, I think the book came out, 2000, I don't know, 9.
It's older. Yeah.
But there was a case from like the 1950s that they were investigating, and the author's like asking the detective, why do you care? Or why are you investigating it? And this point is like, well, because I'm the last one who does like that.
Yeah.
And I just always thought that was like really powerful and probably like salient to a lot of these cases, because as they become cold and people pass away or they don't pass away. I was talking to Bruce Maitland, Breonna Maitland's father, about this, that even before people pass away, many just need to move on from the case. There aren't people left over time. So there's something to be said for the people who do continue to pursue these cases long afterwards. And Dana, you're last but not least.
I guess I've always been a mystery lover. I read mysteries as a kid. I loved watching all of the crime shows. I am a why child. I want to know why things happen, what happened. I guess I'm the who, what, when, why child. And so I started out with that kind of core curiosity that drove me, I think, to move in the direction of becoming a journalist. And then again, towards becoming a librarian, because when I went as an undergraduate student to Point Park University in Pittsburgh, I thought my librarian was like, she was my savior. We had to do these research projects and I didn't know where to find the resources or how to use the resources. And of course, then nothing was online. It was all, you had to go to the library and you had to
catalog.
Yes. And you had to dig around and you had to know where you were supposed to be digging. And so I was very inspired by her. She helped me all the time. And I didn't realize at the time that I would later pursue a master's in library and information science, but I did. And I think that's really what inspired that. I wanted to know, and I wanted to know how to utilize the internet, which was then in 2000, just something that we could dial into and start really utilizing. And I think that's what really inspired me. And so doing that, then starting the research that I did, and then finding Uncovered when it came online and joining the community and leading some research groups, it was like a dream come true to surround myself with people who wanted to do this work and were just as curious as I was, and who really were focused on being an advocate, helping families find answers. We know that resources are limited. We know that law enforcement not every department has a cold case unit. And so to be able to be a member of the public and maybe help, to be a citizen detective or to be a concerned citizen or to be a case advocate, as I like to call myself, that's inspiring. That's hopeful. That gives just families something to grasp onto. There's people out there who care about my family member's case.
Yeah. And sometimes, like, in one episode recently, I had the uncle of somebody who's missing on, and there was another episode that was like this where I had asked about, like, what do we, general public people do to help? And, they talked about, like, you can donate to this, you can do that, or you can just be there. You can just be there and care. And it makes a lot of difference to them. We were talking about this off mic before we got started. And I was saying that, like, if you made up this story and I were a literary agent, the story of Dawn in this case, I would tell you, like, this is way too far-fetched. No one's going to believe it or buy it. So I was hoping you guys could sort of, like, summarize a little bit about Dawn's case, and maybe, maybe a good way to start, even before we get to Dawn's case and its the unfathomable things that happened to us, a little bit about Dawn's life before she died. I would love to, like, find out more about who she was, because I think, and it makes sense in the true crime community, we care so much about sort of like what happened and getting to justice. But sometimes I feel like we flatten and lose the person that was, like, the real world person that was there. Do anyone want to, Lexi, you want to start us, or Andrea? I see smiles all around. Whichever one of you knows more.
Well, it's interesting because as far as acquiring the case, I think Andrea was the first one to really touch it and kind of dive into it. And then she brought us in after the fact because she was like, oh, like, I definitely need more eyes on this. But as far as, like, I said this in our, like, Meet the Host episode, but as we got to learn more about who Dawn was as a person, like, we knew she was incredibly kind and caring, and she was a fierce advocate for justice. And there were so many different, like, little things about her that I think we all saw in her that we were like, oh, if she was around today, like, we would all be her friend. And so it was a very natural decision to want to advocate for her, because I think, like, if something like that happened to any of our friends, like, we would advocate for them without thinking about it. So taking on Dawn's case was kind of a no-brainer. But there's just so many small things about her, how she would volunteer at, like, dog shelters and would give people flowers and such. Like, she was just such a sweet and kind person. And it's so upsetting to see what would ultimately happen to her. But
yeah.
It's hard to not think her, in a picture holding a dog or smiling with someone, or and it's kind of, actually, it was sad for me looking through the pictures of when she was younger and like all this brightness and light. And then there's that handful of pictures that are very close to when she dies. And you can see that like there's a little something missing. But Andrea, you were saying.
Yeah. Well, I mean, even just to like continue on that, I think that's something that we've all felt really strongly about is you're absolutely right. Like the photos of Dawn when she's younger and even as she is an adult, her vibrancy is so clear. And I think what some of the harder photos of her later in life really show is that the stress that she was under and the turmoil that she was experiencing at her job and, you know, and then internally was so real. And I think that's one of the things that is kind of hard for some people to grasp in this case is, oh, like how could you be so afraid of some threats and blah, blah, blah. Oh, it wasn't that bad. But it genuinely was, you know, for Dawn. And yeah, I was just going to share, so last spring, Tony had reached out to Uncovered and just said in an email, you know, I want to submit this suspicious death to the Uncovered database. And, you know, I have a lot of documentation. I worked with Dawn. She helped exonerate me. Please help us. And so, you know, yeah, I mean, we get emails like that pretty often at Uncovered. So it's easy to kind of just like have it fall into an inbox. But one of the things that really struck me differently about this case was Tony had mentioned in his email, go to the free TonyViola.com site and you will find every document you want. And anybody who does cold case research or, you know, stuff like this, we all know like documents are king. Mm-hmm. And so to have someone come to us and say, I have almost everything you can imagine.
I've already been doing, it's almost like he was already doing the work before.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so it was like, okay, like I'm going to take a look at this. And so I did. And then we had reached out, we had a meeting with Tony of just like, who is this guy? Like, I want to make sure that he's, you know, legit and sane essentially. And I've always been blown away by how articulate Tony is and his story is so true, you know? And I mean, like you were saying earlier, Jayson, it's so easy to take a look at this entire case and say, oh my God, it's just a movie, you know?
Yeah, no. It's like the letters when I was a reporter at the Times that we would get from the prison inmates. It's like, yeah, sure.
Yeah, exactly. Right. Thanks for sending it.
Yeah, but it's really helpful when somebody has come to you doing a ton of the legwork and doing it. One of the things I know I had read about Dawn being, you know, interested in criminal justice, and it just struck me as you were speaking, thinking about you as the first one to get, there's so many parallels, right? Like, you guys probably had a lot, like there was probably a lot about her that you could relate to in particular, Andrea, right?
Yeah. I mean, and I'm sure we'll get into more of it as we keep going. I mean, for me personally, some of the parallels continue, but I very much like seeing Dawn's case, and Lexi was saying this before too, I could see a parallel universe where like her and I are in the same college class together, or we're coworkers at just a job. And seeing those types of parallels, it really feels like advocating for a friend. And I know we didn't know her in life, but it feels like we're kind of getting that chance now. And I think that's part of why the three of us feel so strongly about this is like Dawn could easily fit into this friend group. And that's,
she'd be a third co-host. Like she'd be the fourth co-host.
She could be here with us now. Like literally. I could. Yeah.
And she'd do it so well.
I think, I'm sorry. I just wanted to say that I think Dawn was brilliant. I think that when you listen to Tony talk about the advice that she gave him, she knew the ins and outs of his case better than he did, as he stated last week in our live. She was really knowledgeable about the legal side of all of this. I mean, she was giving him advice and making sure that she was looking at the big picture and really understanding how Tony could win his case. And I did not realize that was what was happening until Tony laid it out for us. So I think that to me, she was very smart. She learned very quickly. Tony has said people thought she could be the governor. I mean, they thought she was on a track to really be a successful, strong woman career woman in whatever she chose. And so I think like that is heartbreaking to me. I mean, because it's just that was taken away from her.
What did we lose
Right.
too?
Mm-hmm.
Like, what did we collectively lose when we? And we'll never know. But like you're saying, there are these clues and there are these elements there. I was thinking about just her. We talked in the intro about her being sort of like a little bit rebellious and anti-authoritarian, but that she did really, really, really well in school and she was on a great trajectory, it sounded like. And, just thinking about sort of like all that promise that you guys are talking about and her graduating college and then heading off to work, right? Because I imagine coming out of like college as a criminal justice major and getting a job at the Ohio Attorney General's office, like cleaning the floors is a big deal, right? Like anything,
Yeah.
Anything for that. And where did it go from that promise to eventually, even before you get to her death, it becomes tragic, right? Like on so many levels. Because I think about young people coming with all that optimism and enthusiasm and ending up in an environment where, even if she hadn't ended up dead, certainly things did not seem particularly ethical. Or, think of all those people who have their dreams shattered in that moment. I was just wondering, how did we get there? How did she get there?
Yeah. Well, we know. So while she was graduating college, one of Dawn's criminal justice professors, Arvin Klar, he suggested that Dawn apply for an open position at the Ohio Attorney General's office. And so it was then in 2008 where she's hired by prosecutors Dan Caceres and Mark Bennett. And I mean, like you said, she was an office manager of this, what they called the nation's largest mortgage fraud case. I mean, you're right. Like if she were getting coffee for someone, that would be a huge deal. But her own resume says she was in charge of receiving evidence. She created the chain of custody for files, and she had to help prepare cases for trial. And this is like right out of college. I mean,
she was really giving investigative support, even though.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Right. So, but I mean, it's within the first year that she starts witnessing a lot of this misconduct.
What was it for her that she first noticed?
So I think what she told her parents was she wasn't liking the way they were handling the folders and files and boxes of evidence. She felt like they were stacking them in hallways, that there was no sort of control or security over them, and that people in the, anyone could take anything. And that was very disturbing to her. So that was one of the things that she brought to the attention of her family or complained about and said, you know what, this doesn't feel right to me. There were some requests made of her to wear a wire to tape conversations at Tony's fundraising events, and also to write a check. And they gave her the money. She wrote a personal check. And so basically she was befriending Tony, but hiding this secret. And when she started doing it, she thought she was doing it for the right reasons.
To support the investigation.
Exactly. Yeah. But then along the way, she realized that something was terribly wrong. And that basically they had put her in a position where she was committing crimes by wearing a wire and, writing checks and for them to do kind of shady things to find information.
So it was wearing a wire without a judge's order or wiretapping order. So
yeah,
it was
self-serving for them.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Well, how would they have ever? So they would have never been able to use it as evidence. So what was it they were trying to get by putting her on a wire? Because that's almost scarier to me. And I just say that because if all of a sudden the prosecutor's recording me, that's one thing, right? They're going to use that as evidence against me. But if they're recording me in a way that they can never use at trial, I would be even more concerned. Because, like, what is the plan here? What are you doing?
Yeah.
What are you trying to find out? Yeah.
I think that's part of the whole problem, is that it wasn't that they were necessarily looking for evidence per se. It was that they didn't understand what Tony's defense strategy was going to be. And I think a big part of that is because, as we know now, Tony was innocent of all the crimes that he was being accused of. So the prosecutors, they weren't able to find evidence that proved that he was guilty. So they thought that he was just this master criminal who could hide everything so well that it literally doesn't exist. So to get Dawn to wear a wire was to try to understand, like, what his strategy was going to be. And, you know, I mean, ultimately through Dawn's, you know, connection with Tony and meeting everybody who supported him, she started to realize, like, wait, this guy is innocent. He actually isn't guilty.
So it's like this no-win situation for Tony. Like, you look very guilty because we're finding all this evidence you're guilty. But if you don't look very guilty because we're not finding evidence, then you're just the super master criminal.
It was pretty much that. I mean, they backed themselves into a corner of Tony must be guilty of all these crimes because no evidence exists, but somehow he's got roped up into this task force and being accused of defrauding banks. So they just said he has to be essentially a mastermind.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So, and what was the purpose of the check? Just to befriend him, or was there...
No, I think they wanted to acquire the banking information.
So they wanted to know where it was cashed.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And Tony actually threw in 2 comments into the chat, too, to kind of give context. So one of them, Dawn wore a wire to record me after I was indicted. They wanted defense trial preparations. I was already indicted. If the government wants to talk to me, they should call my attorney. And then he said it's illegal for prosecutors to interfere with defense trial preparation. Dawn was illegally invading the 6th Amendment right to legal representation. The government still has never produced them. So those recordings. That's actually something Tony's in the midst of trying to acquire currently.
So unclear, right, if they have them or are they acknowledging they have them or no?
They're acknowledging that they exist, but they're not acknowledging where they are.
Yeah.
So we end up having a situation where she's like young, out of college. I don't know if she like had lots of friends around still or support or what her support network is, but I imagine among most people who are 24, 25, 26, you're not dealing with like these heavy kinds of issues. She's got her parents to rely on to bounce ideas off of. But for the most part, like most people that age, unless you're me, of course, you're just, you know, you're working for these people, you're admiring them, you're looking up to them, and you're following their lead because you just naturally trust them, it sounds like. And she ends up getting into what she later realizes is like totally unethical behavior. What was it that, and I know she eventually reaches out to Tony's defense team. What was it that led her to eventually do that? Because I'm just thinking about like imagining myself in her position when I was like 24, 25, 26. I would be scared out of my mind. Even if it wasn't, I would be scared out of my mind. So it'd have to be something so big, but also it would be so gut-wrenching to do it. So do you know anything about her process of getting to the point where she reached out?
My guess, and this is more just my own thought on it, I think she just was so consumed with the guilt of starting to really see into Tony's an innocent man, but my bosses have made me participate in all these illegal behaviors, and kind of just wanting to do the right thing because I think she was she realized if not now, then at some point it's going to have to hit the fan. And so for her, I think she cared so deeply about justice that it was something that she kind of I think it just came to a head for her. Do you guys feel the same?
Yeah, and I think it's a mix too of, at that point, Tony was already found guilty of the federal crimes. He was accused of both federal and state crimes, which were the same. And so when
Separate
Dawn was found,
sovereigns, right? He was
yes.
charged
Mhm.
essentially with the same thing because the state and the federal government are considered separate
Mhm.
sovereigns.
Exactly. Yeah.
But the
So-
interesting thing about that, though, is even though they are considered separate sovereigns under American law, rarely do the state and the federal government prosecute you for the exact same thing.
Yeah.
It doesn't happen every day.
Mhm.
Usually, like even in the sniper shootings, for example, in Washington, D.C. with John Muhammad and Leroy Malveaux, they could have been charged federally and locally, but they said, why would we waste all these resources doing it? Why do we know why they did it in this case?
I think it was just that they were, I mean, this task force was going after people like left and right. It almost seems like anybody who had a real estate license like should have been afraid, even if they weren't dealing with mortgages. Because they were going after so many people, right after the housing crisis. Like everybody wants to blame somebody. So not only do they blame as many people as they can, but they double down and make it federal and state.
Yeah. And I think too, like when we talk about the task force, like the people who were indicted, like we're talking well over 1,000, 1,100 people. So a lot, like that's a lot of people. That's a lot of trials. That's a lot of court hearings, all of that. So, it's so vast too that it kind of, for some people, I think they just wanted to plead, serve their time.
Yeah,
and,
they want the vast majority
like
of
just check the
people
box. Like, fine, like I know I didn't do it, but whatever. Which is unfortunate that they were even in that spot. But I think for some people, like that's just how they treated it. But Tony, knowing how much time he could have faced, granted, he did serve like 9.5 years, which is still a lot of time. But yeah, I think it's just, he said he refused to plead guilty and talk to the media and never said no comment. Even when we have conversations with him today, like he's always so candid about his experience.
You can
all
see
that,
it
which
in
I
the
think,
chat.
yeah, very much so. It's exactly like all of our meetings with him.
Yeah.
Which is good because this case is so layered and nuanced, and like we're not mortgage professionals. Like we don't know that side of things. So it's easy to kind of get lost in like the terminology and the legalese of it all too.
Well, and I also think there's a resource thing on the prosecutor side, right? Like if I have that many cases, the way I'm going to be successful is getting the highest percentage of people to plead, because there's no way I have the resources to do that many cases. So it also begs the question, why would you go after him twice? But that is something I suspect we're not going to get an easy answer to.
No.
Why
There is,
go both ways?
I think too, when you ask what pushed Dawn to reach out to Tony, it was bigger than Tony. She knew it was bigger than Tony. There are a lot of people being accused of doing things that they did not do. She played a role in that. And I think that she thought if we can get Tony in the state case to be, it's found not guilty, then we can help others. And so she cared about Tony, but she also cared about all of the other people.
Well, one of the most powerful things in your first Seeking Justice episode that I listened to was hearing Tony talk about Dawn reaching out to him and not even being able to get the words out, and then, doing it again and then saying to her, and him being worried that something was wrong with her, because at this point he doesn't know she works in the prosecutor's office, and being very, very concerned for her, and then her finally getting to the point where she's like, I want to tell you, but don't interrupt me. You can't interrupt me. And the promise, like, I'm just trying to imagine the level of anxiety for somebody in that kind of situation, and probably on Tony's end too, the level of worry for this woman who's helping him, and then probably shock on his side. And I don't know whether she felt a sense of relief or more anxiety. You guys have any?
I can't imagine. I can't imagine. I mean, I can't imagine my 26-year-old self in Dawn's position. I think she was very brave. She was very strong. She was very afraid. She was trying to protect herself around every corner. She was, asking people or finding out ways where she could communicate so that nobody would know. I mean, she was going to extremes. I think when she first started saying these things to Tony, like, we can't meet here, or we need to do this, or I can't email you that way, we have to do it this way. She had a plan that she was following, and she was really afraid of the people she worked for finding out what she was doing. And I think that tells you something. I think that that's, I mean, you can have your normal, like, well, I'm probably going to get, like, this could blow up and bad things could happen. And Dawn was in the position too, where she was being pursued by the FBI. They had reached out to her. That was her dream, to become an FBI agent. She wanted to work for the FBI. She had a background in finance and criminal justice. So she was
go right up
yes.
the alley. Yeah.
And so, and I think she didn't want to blow that, she didn't want to blow that opportunity, but she was so afraid of her bosses. She was so driven to do the right thing that I think she just felt like she didn't have a choice. And so she was creating she was creating ways to protect herself.
Yeah. And I think at that age too, like, you don't know what you don't know. Like, you think you're still kind of coming into your own, you're understanding the world, and, like, being a career woman at that point, like, and trying to really take it seriously. And then to have all these extra factors around it, like, weigh very heavily on her physically, but emotionally too. And I think she was like Dana said, she was incredibly scared, because how do you even tell people in your inner circle that? Like, what would they, people using their power for such awful reasons. So when you think about what Dawn had to experience day in and day out, and we all know too from just past jobs, like, the things that would be said around the water cooler and things like that, like, you wouldn't relay to clients or anything. But, like, God only knows what else she knew beyond this situation.
Right.
So
right. Communicated.
It's vast.
Well, I also think, like, prosecutors already have an enormous amount of power, like, more than police officers or other people. And so that's something to sort of be in awe of mildly, but an unethical prosecutor, that's pretty dangerous. And then with all the things we find out later in the story about the prosecutors, I could completely understand why she'd be in absolute panic. Walk me through sort of what happened in Tony's case once Dawn came forward and to the point where we get to her death.
So we know that after Dawn starts helping Tony, when he's putting his list together of witnesses who are going to testify on his behalf in the state trial, Dawn's name gets put on there because she says, listen, like, I want to testify. I want to talk about what I saw at the prosecutor's office. I want to share the misconduct that's going on.
At that point, is she still working?
At that point, she's not.
It left. Okay.
Yes. And so the prosecutors were threatening her, saying that she violated a confidentiality agreement that actually didn't even exist. But it scared her enough to kind of, like, take pause in the situation of, oh my God, they're threatening to put me in prison for helping you. And I think that's where a lot of the stress started to build up for Dawn.
Did she have a lawyer?
So
through any of this, did she have her own counsel?
No.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can't imagine.
No, I can't imagine either. We know towards the end, she was so afraid of the prosecutors and feeling like she was being followed, and that her apartment was not a safe place to be. She stayed with her parents for 3 weeks. And while she was there ahead of trial, her parents remember Dan Caceres, one of her bosses, and some other person coming to the house and looking for technology. They were looking for computers. They were looking for hard drives.
This was to the parents' house or her apartment? To her apartment?
To her home.
Her parents' house. Yeah.
To her parents' home. And Dan is the lead prosecutor, or her primary boss as a...
Her primary boss, yeah.
Yeah.
And, Dawn's dad said, come back with a warrant. Like, you can't come to our house and make requests like that. And they never did come back. But it was, again, like, it's just showing more that these people were, Yes, they're willing to go to your parents' house and like to see where you're hiding out ahead of trial. And I mean, again, just feeling like there's no place that's really safe, I think was really starting to get to Dawn.
Okay.
Yeah.
Was she had an apartment, right? And
Yeah, she had her own apartment.
but she was staying with her parents because of her concern, like wanting
She just didn't feel safe. Yeah. I think the pressure of it all was weighing so heavily. And I think there was a lot of the line between professional work life and home life was starting to blur because they wanted her to bring hard drives home and to dispose of them and things like that. So just, nothing felt safe to her.
Yeah. PSA for kids: when your bosses ask you to take hard drives home to dispose of them, something is
Never
very
did that.
wrong.
Something's really wrong. Yes.
So one of the things I know I read about in reading the story is that substance abuse started to become a problem and increasing, it sounds like, over time. Is this sort of like correlated to the stress around this, or?
We think so. Yeah. I think just the pressure of it all and kind of needing an outlet and I think some of it just stems from she's young. So of course you don't have the right awareness to know of other outlets for that sort of thing. But I think she relied heavily on alcohol. But I do think she was
I don't think we can limit that to young people.
Yeah. And I think towards the end she was trying to make
planning to get to a point where you get older, and all of a sudden they're wiser about that, give it up now.
No,
that's so funny.
We were meeting yesterday and my husband pops in and he has a bottle of Traveler whiskey. It's a new release. And he brings it in and we're all we're talking and he's like, look what I got you. And I was like, thanks. Can't wait to try it. But it was just, I was like, whoa.
Perfect timing.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. But so there was sort of like, it kind of makes sense, right? Like the more, like one of the things that we know with addiction, the more isolated you are, the more dangerous it becomes. And instantly knowing secrets like this in a situation becomes more isolating, which then, instead of talking to people and processing things, the substances become a part of it.
Yeah.
And her, like, before she died, her parents had come to the house and removed alcohol. Was that at her request, or was she open with them about how much she was drinking? How did that all come out?
I think, from my understanding of it, I think her parents, they were very aware of her drinking situation. So they were trying to mitigate what they could. So the night before she was found deceased, her parents were over at her apartment. Actually, to back it up, so she returned to her apartment on that Sunday. And I believe on that Monday, she had a job interview because she had since been fired from her job at the prosecutor's office.
Right.
And so she was found deceased on a Wednesday for context.
How close to her death was she fired?
I believe it was months. Like it wasn't immediate.
Okay. Mm-hmm. And was she fired because of this, or did they state a reason for why she was fired?
Yeah. They say it was related to substance abuse, and they have it all in written down in emails that allegedly Dawn was, slurring her speech at work and that she refused to take a drug test. And so they fired her. I think it's interesting that something like that is documented the way that it is, just because, knowing how things ended a couple months later, it's just very interesting.
Okay. Thanks, Andrea, Lexi, Dana. I think we're going to take a pause here and we'll be back with you all next week where we're going to explore the crime scene where Dawn was found, the response of the Pharma Police Department, the medical examiner's questionable ruling in the case, and what it was like in the courtroom when the judge announced Dawn's death. We're also going to take a look at where the case is right now and what Andrea, Lexi, and Dana are, looking for in terms of outcomes. But we're also going to look perhaps more poignantly at the things in Andrea, Lexi, and Dana's lives that have motivated them to pursue the reopening and resolution to Dawn's case. In the meantime, if you'd like to join us for more discussions with us and other listeners, we can be found on most social media platforms, including a listener-run Facebook group called the Silver Linings Fireside Chat. For deeper conversations with our guests and live conversations with our other listeners, you can join us on our Patreon at www.patreon.com/The Silver Linings Handbook. I'm Jayson Blair, and this is the Silver Linings Handbook podcast. We'll see you all again next week.